Hi, my name is Kayla. I just got out of the Army. Literally, this is my first day as a civilian. I had 96 days of transition leave that just ended yesterday. So, just a very brief intro for people who don't know me. I've got notes here on everything that I plan to discuss today so I don't get too off track. I just finished 8 years of active duty as a captain. I got out at JBLM, and I knew for many years that I wanted to get out of the Army, but I had to stay in for 8 years because I had a grad so coming out of West Point. So about a year-ish ago, I decided that because I enjoy writing so much, I would like to document some of my personal experiences in the Army, and then specifically document my transition resignation process because I thought it might be helpful for some people. Through this, I have learned so much about all of the different reserve component opportunities that exist that I had no idea were even available before. And I'm getting contacted more recently lately by a lot of people that I don't know who, maybe saw one of the articles posted on Facebook or have just seen one or two things and not seen a more complete picture of everything I'm kind of doing right now. So with this video, I want to provide a more holistic kind of summary of everything I've learned over the past year about all these different reserve component opportunities, and at least it'll give people who are interested some topics to research and some things to consider. And then overall, my aim with the blog and the website and kind of everything I've been talking about recently, for me, first one is therapeutic, and it's a great way for me to deprogram and figure out, like, why am I the way that I am after 8 years of being immersed in this environment and this culture. And ultimately, it's not to convince anybody to leave the Army. It's not to convince anyone to participate in some part of the reserve component. It's simply to encourage you to inform and educate yourself on all of the options that are out there, many, again, which you probably don't know about, because there really are limitless possibilities. So from my perspective, and I've noticed this in myself, it's easy to become resentful or filled with negative emotion about your current situation while you're on active duty. I found myself in that position multiple times. And I think it really starts to get worse when you feel trapped, or you feel like it's a very, very binary decision. Either you're 100% out or you're 100% all in on active duty. And no one really has discussions about all the other options that there are in between that, and there are a lot. So this is also, all of this is just to remind you that while you may have to listen to the often insular narrative perpetuated by some senior leaders, aka, there's no greater job in the world than serving in the United States Army, and well, you're going to find all the same issues in the civilian world that you will in the military, so you might as well just stay in the military. Or, once you hit 10, you might as well stay in because 20 is going to hit before you know it, and time's going to fly by. All of those kind of messages that we often get from senior leaders. Yes, you have to listen to that, but you do not have to let that be the only influence on your decision of how you want to live your life and what decisions you end up making. So part of what's motivated me to share this information is the fact that I was completely oblivious to all of this up until the point that I actually started the transition process. I knew I wanted to transition for a while, but was so busy that I couldn't think or research about any of this stuff until I was actually in the process of getting out. And I would imagine many of you are in the same situation. There's really no incentive for anyone on active duty, like your battalion commander or your battalion S3 or your sergeant major or your company commander, to sit you down and be like, hey, I know you're having a rough time and you're not enjoying work-life balance, or you're not finding fulfillment in what you've got going on right now, but there's about 100 other ways that you could potentially contribute to the organization and serve that aren't to the detriment of your personal health, your family, or whatever circumstances you have going on. No one's having those type of conversations. Typically, there are some people that did have those kinds of conversations with me, but it was the exception, definitely not the rule. So, and honestly, they probably aren't even aware of many of these opportunities themselves. It's just funny to me because making hugely impactful life decisions is already overwhelming enough, and then the water's just clouded even more because not only is there an absence of a discussion on these types of opportunities with senior leaders and mentors, but also there's deliberate messaging, in my mind, from my perspective, deliberate messaging to dissuade you from leaving active duty or really pursuing any path that is external to what is professionally acceptable or expected. So whether that's becoming a civilian, whether that's reserve component service, whether that's a VTIP or a functional area, all of that is definitely not encouraged. I think generally speaking, the culture's changing, which is nice. That's a good thing. But I still think the majority of the messaging that's perpetuated is nope, like this is what you do. You're a platoon leader, and then you're an XO, and then you go to staff, and then you're company commander, and then you're battalion S3 and battalion XO, and blah, 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 all that stuff. So I think when your eyes are opened to what else is out there, it puts you in a position that's much more encouraging. And again, it's easy to feel trapped and like there's no light at the end of the tunnel. That's not a good spot to be in. So to me, that messaging, that deliberate messaging by a lot of leaders in the military, it just highlights that in many cases, these people have been indoctrinated to such a degree that they don't necessarily view people as human beings, but more so as numbers to fill a slot, as bodies to do an assignment or some task, instead of looking out for people's genuine best interests, like what is best for this person. And I understand that those often are competing interests, the best interests of the organization versus the best interests of individuals. And it is about the greater organization in a lot of ways. But just because that's what the organizational culture is doesn't mean that you have to limit yourself and limit your options and limit your research based off of that. So I wish I had known about some of these opportunities earlier, and I hope this will help in your research and decision making. So let's get to the reserve component opportunities. After this past year of research, I found it useful to visualize all these options kind of in a spectrum, and at the far end of the spectrum, active duty, and then at the other far end, the IRR, which is the individual ready reserves. So nobody needs to know anything about active duty. Everybody's aware of that already, but let's start with the far other end, which is the IRR. The IRR is the individual ready reserves. A lot of people confuse that with inactive ready reserves. They insert that as the I in the acronym. It is not the inactive ready reserves. However, you might as well be, because really, for all intents and purposes, you're not doing anything while you're in the IRR. So you are, in essence, inactive. Everybody will serve in the IRR if you have not served 8 years of a military obligation. So whether you enlist for 3 years or 5 years, or you graduate from West Point or OCS and you owe 3 or 5 years or something to that effect, everybody owes 8 years cumulatively. So for me, I've already done my 8 years, and I'll explain my situation in a second here. But if you've enlisted for 3 years and you decide not to re-enlist, you're going to get out. At the end of that, then you will owe 5 years in the IRR, and you'll automatically be enrolled in the IRR. Same goes for someone who graduated from West Point and owes 5 years active duty. At the end of that 5 years, they'll owe 3 years in the IRR, and they'll automatically be enrolled. So for me, I ended up serving 8 years in active duty, so I have no remaining military service obligation. However, I elected to stay in the IRR voluntarily, just because I didn't want to resign my commission outright, so that enables me to maintain my commission. And later, if there's some kind of really cool reserve opportunity that rolls along and the timing is right with whatever I've got going on in life, maybe I'll take advantage of it. Maybe I won't. But the bottom line is, in the IRR, I'm literally not going to do anything. There's like sometimes an annual muster or online musters. There's things that you may have to do, but it really is very minimal. The only time you may be activated, and this is from my research and what I've read, is if like World War III kicks off. So after 9/11, there were some IRR soldiers activated, and in some other specific instances, there were some IRR soldiers activated. But for me, myself, being in the IRR, I am not concerned at all. So it's a very low risk, low commitment way to maintain my commission, but not really need to do anything with that. So other things to note about the IRR: you will not get paid, but you can drill for points. So the point system is a whole nother discussion, but that's how the reserve component works with respect to retirement. So you have to earn 50 points to receive a good year that will count towards reserve component retirement. And you can do that while you're in the IRR. If you apply through HRC, get assigned to a local unit, you can drill with them, and you earn those 50 good points, and you can literally retire out of the IRR, which is kind of crazy to think about. So you can also get put on active duty orders voluntarily if you sign up through MobCop/Tour of Duty, which is a website that is essentially a job listing site that is for all reserve components. So it lists specific part of the reserve component that it's open to. So maybe IRR, IMA, guard, or reserve. And some are open to all four, some are open to only a few, some are just IRR. That's more rare. But that's another way that you can be like, hey, I want to be on orders and go do some assignment. They range from anywhere from 2 weeks to 365 days. So you get put on active duty orders and you will get paid in that instance, obviously. But something to note, if that's your plan, it's probably less likely that you as an IRR soldier will get selected for some of these assignments, because as an IRR soldier, you're much less likely to be up to date on things like PHA, 350-1 training, all the stuff that someone who's in the Guard or Reserves is more likely to be up to date on. So it's less cumbersome to activate a Guard or Reserve soldier on active duty orders than an IRR soldier. Another thing, you can be promoted as long as you complete all of your PME, so career course or CGSC and all their promotion requirements, which I believe includes a DA photo and whatever else goes along with that. If your promotion packet is complete, then you will still get promoted and again can still retire. So you cannot get TRICARE, but you can pay for dental. I actually might end up doing that myself. I'm not sure yet, but you don't get access to TRICARE like you do in the TRICARE Reserve Select like you do in some of the other parts of the reserve component. However, if you are in active duty orders, you will. I think it's for 30 days or more. One thing that's unique that I just discovered that I'll be doing a blog post on later is the only authorized IRR position that I'm aware of called the MALO program, and it's at West Point. It stands for Military Academy Liaison Officer, and there are over 400 positions because it's more or less correlated with the number of congressional districts, and you essentially serve as a liaison. It's not just for West Pointers, it's officer based though, and you essentially serve as a liaison between applicants and then West Point. So helping high school students through the application process, whether that's like the paperwork or the physical fitness test and everything that goes along with that. So that is the only position I found where you can actually be in your IRR capacity, but still serve. You're not being put on active duty orders. You're not, your status isn't changing. You're in the IRR the entire time. I tried to reach out to HRC to get some clarity to see, hey, are there any other authorized IRR positions in the Army? And no help, which wasn't surprising, but whatever. So that's an interesting position and something that, if you're doing your civilian job, you're in your home state, and you're passionate about mentoring young people or want to help them with the application process to West Point, I don't know, it may be something that would be cool to do. So that kind of sums up IRR, which is on that far end of the least participatory of the entire spectrum from IRR to active duty. So one step further up the spectrum would be IMA. IMA stands for Individual Mobilization Augmentee. And what I found the simplest way to explain this is essentially your typical 1 week in a month, 2 week in the summer commitment that you'd have in a normal Guard or Reserve unit. You can serve all of that at once or over 2 periods of time or 3 periods, or really whatever you can negotiate with your unit and your boss. So I know a guy who goes to Hawaii every year for an annual exercise, and I think it's like 3 weeks or something. So he does that, and that's his annual time commitment essentially for the IMA program. He has normal healthcare with his job, but he has access to TRICARE too. His work gives him time off to go do that, and that's what he does every year. And there's the full spectrum. That's just one example, but there are so many different ways that you can serve as an IMA soldier. So again, you have access to TRICARE Reserve Select, and it's much more customizable and tends to be more specialized, but something to remember is that you're completely on your own. So it's, some IMA soldiers may have access to this, but many don't have access to an S1 section they can just walk into and ask questions or get paperwork processed. It's like you are your advocate and you're the one who's having to figure out pay and all the paperwork and navigate all the bureaucracy on your own. So that's something just to note with the IMA program. One step further on the spectrum would be Guard and Reserve. So something that someone mentioned to me recently, the way they looked at the Guard and Reserve was active duty light. And so you serve your 1 week in a month, 2 weeks in the summer, and with this specific path, it's more commonly thought of as maintaining a strong connection with the tactical employment of your branch. So you'll take the more traditional pathway, PLXO, company commander, battalion S3, battalion XO, all of that stuff. And some people like that. Like if you want to go to CTC rotations and you want to be a battalion commander and still participate in that capacity, then you can. Maybe the Guard or Reserve is right for you. Something to note with this, when it's more so Guard versus Reserve, they're state versus federal entities, so you'll find a little bit more variation in the types of benefits offered by different National Guards. So I know the Texas National Guard has a really good program and a smaller state may not. So something just to research when you are deciding if you do want to do the Guard versus the Reserves. A benefit of the Reserves versus the Guard is that there's many more positions available. So when you're in the Guard, if you're a particular pay grade and you're trying to do a particular assignment, like you can go do that, but only if there's a vacancy. So if people are staying in that Guard unit for years and years and years until they retire, that vacancy may not open up for a while. So you may be stuck if you're in a really small state and there's only one of those positions. But if you're in a larger state, or if you join the Reserves, there's going to be a lot more openings and vacancies, so you'll be able to do some of the things you want to do, whereas otherwise you may be limited in a smaller state. So something to note with all of these reserve component options, you don't sign a contract with a particular unit. So unlike, you don't do that in active duty either, but unlike active duty where you show up at a unit and you're like, okay, well, this is my life now for the next 3 years. In the reserve component, if you get somewhere and you don't like it, you can leave. It's as simple as that. So I don't know how easy or quick it is, but it is an option. If you get to a unit and for whatever reason you don't like the mission or how the unit runs or butt heads with some of the leaders, like you have the option just to leave. So that's something that's pretty neat too. Across all of these reserve component options, something to consider is what I mentioned first with the IRR, which is the Mob Cop Tour duty site, which I'll link below. It's available to all components, and it's something that you can do if you're in between assignments, or you're an IMA soldier and you're in between jobs and you're like, I want to go do something. You can sign up for that and go do a 6-month assignment in some random state or even overseas. So those options are there. Ultimately, all of these are very interesting options to look into. It allows you to keep a door open to come back on active duty later if you want to, as opposed to resigning your commission outright, which gives you very little opportunity to come back, and it's very difficult, bureaucratic, paperwork-ridden process. So something to consider. It's like you can leave active duty, but if you're apprehensive and you're thinking, okay, I don't know if I'm going to like the civilian world, I don't know if I'm going to miss the Army, well, those two considerations can be solved very easily with everything I just explained to you. And then separately, something I'm noticing is an interesting phenomenon is that there's a lot of military people who are transitioning out and sharing their personal experience based off of whatever work they end up doing or what their specific experiences were with internships or what their plan was, what worked, didn't work, resources, all that stuff. It's awesome because with the internet now, unlike before where information wasn't that available, you could get it through official channels and that's it. Now it's like information's everywhere, which is an awesome thing.
That being said, some additional resources are SitReps to Steerco's, which is an Instagram, Facebook, and website. Its emphasis is on transitioning to the corporate world, finance, tech, and MBA programs. Military Transition Hub, which is a website. It provides a plethora of resources compiled by a group of junior officers and even organizes recommended steps in a timeline based on when you'll be transitioning. Dental Veterans is an Instagram and website. It's aimed at providing information about transitioning into practicing dentistry after the Army. The Veteran Professional is an Instagram and website. Its emphasis is on graduate school, entrepreneurship, and professional careers following the military. I also have 2 friends working on projects now, both aimed at assisting people with their transition out of the military.
So in closing, I hope that all of this is helpful. Thank you for those who have taken the time to read any of the posts that I've written. I definitely put a lot of time and effort into it, and it has been educational for me. I've learned a lot. I've met a lot of people. So it's all a net positive there. And I plan to continue to post things on related topics as I get time to. So follow along and please be patient, because coordinating interviews and doing all the writing and the editing and everything while living in a van is all time consuming. So stuff will be slow, but I still plan on working on all of this. Best of luck in your research as you try to figure out your own life and make your own decisions.